Francis, talk about the evolution of the kinds of images you were making, because earlier on, I was aware of close-up photography of objects that were juxtaposed, that had a kind of similar quality to them, even though they were totally different things. Like I mentioned, the brain and the snake. But you've evolved into making much more multifaceted images that have depth from different perspectives of both reflection and people in the front of the image and things inside the image. And so if you could talk about the evolution, what led you in that direction.
Yeah, well, those you're talking about diptychs and triptychs and things like that I was making, and that was a period of time that I really started to become interested in creating a group of pictures that were about the history of technology. And so again, it goes back to that idea about making pictures of not only about what I think is important in myself, but also bringing in the medium of photography. And for me, Anna and I owned a gallery together, and for over a decade, and I curated a show that you were in, Ray, called "It's All About Photography," and I sort of connected a lot of. I've always been interested in the history of technology and how technology evolves. I've taught classes in the history of technology and artists' influence on that. And I can go back to the beginning of the cave paintings, and you can sort of walk through the whole process of the history of technology and the history of art going hand in hand. But one of the main things was that the triptych and the diptychs that you mentioned sort of came out of my work in my interest in Daguerre and the history of photography. And so I was working at the time in Paris with people who were trying to build a Daguerre museum. So those diptychs and triptychs were sort of a nod to Daguerre. And what I mean by that is that Daguerre was a painter. He invented a piece of technology that lives on right here in front of us and has had a huge impact on the world. And this is an artist doing this. And so that concept really sort of is something I identified with. And so Daguerre, as a painter, painted his whole life from beginning to end. But as a photographer, he was interested in the camera, like many photographers, Vermeer, going back to a lot of different other photographers as well, or not photographers, painters, who utilized the camera as a technical device or as a tool in making their art. And that was Daguerre's interest. And in the end, he probably only made somewhere, and there's lots of discussion about this, somewhere between 13 and 17 daguerreotypes. And most of it was for scientific demonstration of the process. But when he was asked to make art and put something in the Louvre or in a museum, he created a triptych. And he did this a number of times. And that's really where all of that triptych and diptych work that I was doing, it was a nod to Daguerre. And so that's where all of that started. And also that sort of, I think, led into my most recent work as well.
Interesting. So Anna, I want to know, you've never given me an answer, but I want you to answer this for the world. What motivated you to stop making the objects that you were making, like the crushed cigarette on a pedestal object. That I think you did that for several years, right? You were carving, they were wood, and you were carving them and painting them.
Very
And
oversized, yeah.
yeah, and did you lose interest? You know, tell me why you stopped doing those.
I don't know. You know, I mean, I've always been interested in objects, and so objects become symbols, and those symbols are my private hieroglyphics. So when I was doing the reliefs, there were certain objects that kept coming back. I don't know. You know, I mean, as a sculptor, there are a lot of sculptors like me that we just kind of love learning new methods and new materials. So I think after those wooden pieces, I was doing the bronze reliefs and a lot of the bronze work. And then I did some stone carving. And then I started doing ceramics, which is kind of what I started out in the very beginning. So I think there's something to do with the materiality of you know, the different push and pull of a material. And right now I've been doing ceramics for a while. I mean, using clay as a material, not ceramics that way. But I'm kind of craving to go back to bronze. I'm craving the delicacy and the ability to cantilever things out that you can do with metal that you can't do with any other material.
Did childbirth motivate you to express that experience in your art?
No.
Okay. I must be it must have been a dream I had of you.
It's a dream. But so I was still carving those huge wooden things when I had Mona. And there's a great photograph of Francis's that was in Provincetown Arts. So it must have been 1989. There's a great photograph of me. I'm pregnant, and it's in my studio, and there's the big wooden knife and everything. And but anyway, when Mona was like a couple of years old, I started making those little carving those little wooden figures with like mothers and daughters. Like there's a piece with me holding her upside down. And so having Mona in my life did inform my work for a certain amount of years. I did start making pieces with her in them. And I have a big piece that's kind of Marisol inspired of me and Mona, kind of almost life size.